Hello and welcome to Matthew chapter 17. So Matthew chapter 17 has 4 different sections. The first is the transfiguration, and then Jesus heals a boy with epilepsy, but it's been caused by a demon. And then there's Jesus foretells his death, and then at the end, it's kind of a cool story. I'll just mention it here, where they ask Jesus to pay his taxes, and so he asks Peter to go and find a fish, and the first fish he'll have will have all the taxes that they need. So he opens up the fish, and he gets his taxes. So that's what's happening. The first part, I'm only going to talk about the healing of the boy and the transfiguration. And the transfiguration is probably the most amazing part of this chapter. What happens is it says, the very first words of this chapter says, and 6 days later, and so you have to figure, well, 6 days later from what? Well, right before that it said that Jesus said that some people will see Jesus in his kingdom. And then it says 6 days later. What's interesting is all over the Bible it never says, and then 6 days later. It's just like, and then this happened, and this happened, and this happened. But why 6 days later from this? And it's clear that he's connecting the two. He's saying, well, 6 days later from when he said that, he took us up this mountain. He took Peter, James, and John up this mountain, and Jesus was transformed, and he turned into a white that is as white as light, it says. So, and then it kind of says that, it kind of hints that they were sleeping, and then they woke up and they saw Jesus in this bright light, and he was talking to Moses and Elijah. I think the Moses and Elijah part is interesting to me, and I'll tell you why. One, why Moses and Elijah? Well, part of the reason is that Moses, when people would talk about the Bible, they would often say you have Moses and the prophets were symbolized by Elijah. He was like the first major prophet. And so when they would talk about the Bibles, they say, well, we have Moses and the prophets. And yeah, they were the symbol of the Old Testament. The other interesting thing about that is that Elijah didn't exactly die. Like, nobody saw his body. It's like his body was taken up into heaven. And so it's interesting that he was, kind of brought back on earth for a little bit. And the other interesting thing is the only other place that something like that has happened was Moses, who they say he did die, but then it said that God just kind of like came down and took his body. Like he was, like the earth just kind of swallowed him up, like he was buried by God. So we're led to believe that Moses and Elijah were kind of like taken by God, and here they are again for just a little bit. And as soon as they woke up, it looked like they were leaving, like Jesus was talking to them. We don't know what they were saying, but part of the reason that Jesus wanted them to see this was because it gives Jesus, it's just amazing that Jesus revealed who he was. And that's what he was doing here. And he's among, the the symbols of the Bible. So it's showing that Jesus is at least equal with these other men. And we know that he is more than these other men. So they come down. Oh, and then I think the most important part of this is that after they wake up, Peter says, oh, we need to stay here. Let's make a tent for them. And he's really saying, let's make a shrine for for these men, you know, that they're here. This is good that we stay here. And God, while Peter was still speaking, you know, it's clear that God interrupted Peter. But while he was still speaking, God said, "This is my son. Listen to him." In the same way that you're supposed to read the Bible, it's saying, listen to Jesus. His word is equal to, if not equal, it's more than what you read in the Old Testament. So as they were coming down the mountain, they saw the rest of the disciples, and they were fighting with some Pharisees or scribes. And it says that they were trying to cast out a demon from a young boy who had epilepsy, and the demon was causing this epilepsy, and they couldn't get the demon out. Now, they'd done it in the past. You know, Jesus gave them the authority to cast out demons, and they went off on these like short mission trips, you know, earlier, I forget which chapter it was, but Jesus sent out the 12, but for some reason they couldn't cast out this demon. And Jesus talks to the dad, and the dad explains what's going on, and Jesus says, "You faithless generation, how long must I bear with you?" And then he cast out the demon. And then this is the most interesting part to me. Later on, his disciples were like, "Why weren't we able to cast out the demon?" And Jesus says, "It's because you have little faith. If you had faith the size of a mustard seed, you could tell that mountain to throw itself into the sea and it would do it." He's saying there's nothing that you couldn't do if you guys had just a little bit of faith. So what does that mean for us? And if anybody knows me personally, they may have heard me say this story. That's something that has had a big impact in my life because it changes the way I think about faith. And that is that there was this guy named Charlie Peace. He was a criminal, and he was in England, and he was being executed. And at his execution, the minister comes up to him and he says, you know, he's saying that, you know, the words that you say during a normal, I don't know, execution, you know, I guess it'd probably be the same things you would say at a funeral. But Jesus is saying these things to this man, and he's not very passionate about it. And the guy stops the priest and he says, "Do you believe this?" And the priest says, yeah, I suppose I do. And he said, "Well, I don't believe this. But if I believed this, the way that you claim you believe it, I would crawl across London, or I would crawl across England on my hands and knees through broken glass to save one soul from the hell that you speak about." And I remember thinking about that story when I first heard it, and I think, well, there's got to be a fallacy here because my life doesn't look like that. And honestly, I don't know anybody's life looks like that. They crawl across England on their hands and knees through broken glass. And I kept on thinking, what's the fallacy? After thinking about this for hours as a young person, I came to the conclusion that there is no fallacy, that he's absolutely right. It is, we should be crawling across England on our hands and knees through broken glass to save one soul. That would be gain for us to do that. And then it comes back, well, why, if there's no fallacy, then why doesn't my life look like that? And how different would the church look like if we had that? And the conclusion is that we don't believe. You know, I'm a believer. I call myself a believer, but in reality, I don't believe. I don't have faith like that. And what Jesus is saying in this passage is like, if you had faith the size of a mustard seed, he's not saying you have no faith. He said you have little faith. But if your faith was the size of a mustard seed, and a mustard seed is like really tiny. If you had faith that was even this big, you could tell that mountain to go into the sea, and it would. So there's something that's interesting too. This is not talking about belief necessarily. Belief is something different from faith. You know, faith is holding to something. You know, if you're talking about staying true to your wife, you say, I'm faithful. You know, I wouldn't look at another woman. I wouldn't be with another woman. I am faithful to my wife. You wouldn't say, I believe in my wife. That's something different. But you're holding to your wife. You're saying, I'm not going to hold on to anything else. I'm going to hold tight to this. That's what faith is. That's what faithfulness is. So that's what's going on here. Jesus is saying, if your faithfulness, if you're holding on to this, he's really saying this is a relationship issue. If you had a relationship with me that was holding close, not just believing, although that's a big part of it, then you could tell this mountain to be thrown into the sea and it would. So, well, that's Matthew chapter 17. All right, bye.